Welcome, everyone. It's good to be part of this program. Maybe you're very close to where I live, and maybe you're really far away, but this is certainly, we are distance in time. So I'm speaking to you from the past. And I'm really glad to be part of this program. Thank you to Justin for inviting me and all those at Buddhistdoor Global who organized this event, as well as to Raymond and all of our other friends at Buddhistdoor Global with whom we've enjoyed at One Earth Sangha a productive partnership now for many years. So yeah, I'm Kristin Barker. I'm director and co-founder of One Earth Sangha. I'm coming to you from unceded Piscataway lands. It has the colonized name of Washington, D.C. And so I want to just pause here and appreciate the Piscataway peoples for loving this place into its well-being. And I also want to appreciate, because we're in a Dharma setting, my Dharma ancestors. In particular, I want to name today Ajahn Chah, the brilliant Thai monk who lived much of his life wandering forests as an ascetic, under perilous conditions with tigers and cobras, discovering the Dharma that so deeply informs my own practice. So again, yeah, welcome and thank you to those watching, and I hope you will join us in the live sessions that Buddhistdoor Global has organized as part of this online conference. So the title of my talk is Touch the Earth, the Power of Local Community-Based Action. So I'm going to be exploring in this talk the potential when we bring ourselves, our wisdom, our practice to local issues in community, and suggest that that is a powerful way forward. It is the integration of inner and outer work. It's a chance to put together our love for the earth, for all things ecology, for nature, for environment, together with our love for justice and our love for the Dharma. It's a beautiful bringing in and touching, getting to ground with those beautiful aspirations and practices. So I can say that the time, especially here in the US where I am, with the national and even international politics and political dynamics that are underway right now, the time has never been better. This is exactly the movement that we need, is going local. So it's important that before I begin, I qualify my perspectives, my own understandings, and the conditioning that that has generated the perceptions of wisdom and also distortion. As Donna Haraway, one of my favorite authors, advises, especially when entering into these kinds of territories, it's critical that I situate my knowledge. So with that, I am an able-bodied white woman born into middle-class status in the United States as a citizen. I benefit from especially in hindsight, incredibly cheap undergraduate and graduate education. My basic needs have always been met, and again, with respect to the rest of the world and history, external conditions for me have never been anything other than cushy, quite easeful, honestly. I identify as queer and have been richly and deeply blessed. I'm so grateful in matters of race by my relationships with women of color. My Dharma education began in the 1990s, and I became a convert, if you will, in the 2000s to the Insight tradition. And that has remained the portal through which the teachings have come to me, the communities through which I have learned and practice and continue to develop my Dharma path. I am raised certainly by the lands and waters and deep culture of northern New Mexico, and then spent a good chunk of my career working in mainstream environmental organizations, really up until the founding of One Earth Sangha. So those are just some of my qualifications, if you will, but I don't mean those as my bona fides, as the, experience and expertise that I bring, but rather that they qualify the way that I see the world. They generate perceptions, and certainly no small amount of misperception and even bias. So I aspire to be helpful, take responsibility for sharing my understandings here and describing them as I do. And I acknowledge their significant limitations and welcome the criticism of those limitations. So with that, let me begin by actually bringing in another favorite author. This is Britt Ray, recently published Generation Dread. And listen for the Dharma in this. This is such a great way to start us off. The myth of the separate self has been ripped many of us away from nature's intelligence, and certainly has fueled this deadly crisis. The idea that we are separate from and superior to our environment and humanity as a whole is a cunning and powerful lie. Deconstructing this lie and changing the dominant mindset is critical to shifting from the path of destruction. Our personal protective equipment for the long emergency ahead depends on recognizing our interconnection. Emotional intelligence, practices to stretch the window of tolerance, the ability to sit with uncertainty, the dexterity to balance hope and fear, a commitment to not narratively foreclose the future. I'll read that again. A commitment to not narratively foreclose the future in phrases like, it's too late. The belief that our actions are meaningful, an embracing of ambivalence, a connection to a strong community that acts together to care for itself. All these skills appear in the toolkit for surviving and thriving in the years to come. If the lion's share of mental health care moves from expensive one-on-one treatment to the social climate, and we combine this with an ongoing faithful dedication to reduce global emissions, we still have a chance at creating a virtuous upward cycle. This is 2022, remember, published earlier this year. A fruitful tipping point, one that even fossil fuel companies and the political establishment cannot thwart. The sooner we realize that no one is coming to save us, that we must do it together ourselves, the better off we will be. So that's a great way to open up what I want to point to. Because indeed, mental health professionals are identifying that our psychological well-being is based on 3 Ps. Well, that I'm going to play with the definitions of a little bit. But those 3 Ps are place, people, and purpose. That is, investment in our location on the earth, the social fabric that we find ourselves in, the social connections that we have that are within that local environment, and our spiritual practice, that is our purpose with a slightly larger lens to include our full spiritual framework and practices. So let's start with place. Why place and why local? I want to suggest that the modern is so different than throughout human history, but one of the ways in which the modern is different is that the travel that we have access to, the virtual connections that we have access to, have never been easier and cheaper. And they have their advantages. Well, look at us here, connecting across incredible distances for things that we care deeply about. There's beauty in that, so much to learn. And so with travel, learning about different cultures and other ways of being, seeing just how beautiful this world really is. Finding community when aspects of ourselves are marginalized by our local community or even our families and friends. We can find good company when we connect with larger we have access to a larger community. And again, I point to this community in One Earth Sangha as examples, but there is a downside. First of all, travel itself, we know, is really hard on the planet. But even in these virtual settings, there's a social downside. There's a social cost here, and maybe even an environmental one. Because as our needs are met far away, we divest from the ground beneath our feet, the neighbor next door, the local people, species, communities, lands, and waters that we need and that need us. So again, this is a new challenge. It's not just that our food and stuff come from far away, but our people may be spread beyond our streets, towns, and cities. So the invitation is to connect, to invest ourselves in ways that support local health and well-being of the living Earth community, including people, and as a matter of and guided by our spiritual practice. So we can be supportive of our communities, our local lands and waters. Our own well-being is supported in this way because local invest in something, a kind of in-person connectivity for us, and durable relationships can come from that. And finally, it's of course inseparable from the global, from the regional, from scale it all up, because of course these local combines with local and becomes regional, and then we have the world. This is our contribution, can be our contribution to planetary well-being. I want to argue here as well that there is an increased agency here. We know that part of what ails us so, who are seeing what is underway with our planet, is that we feel like I'm just one person. What can I do? A global specific response to climate depends on actions of international bodies by definition, and then downscales to national bodies like Congress, like parliaments, whatever the national legislation body, to global corporations, and then their regional instantiations. So global climate change is the actions not only of current humanity, but history in the making, this atmospheric buildup. And with such catastrophic outcomes, how can we not feel overwhelmed by that? Of course we do. Of course we feel I'm just one person. It's hard to feel our power. And indeed, so many of those institutions have built up immunities to challenge. They have lobbyists. They are very insulated and well protected, increasingly so. So of course we can feel like not only I'm just one person, but the barriers are huge. But not local. Local, obviously, by definition, smaller scale, more accessible. You have standing. Where you stand, you have standing. Your interest, that of your neighbors. It's a larger portion. You can get to know the issues, the dynamics, the players. My friends in international and national environmental politics agree that this is critical, that going local is absolutely, this is the time. It also can build your sense of service to place. The ground beneath you, the trees, the other rooted ones with whom you breathe, the very waters that flow through you, the earth that you kiss with your feet, to borrow from Thich Nhat Hanh. Even in working on abstract legislation, reduction in emissions policy, you can dedicate this to the local communities and know that you are doing your part for the larger fabric, and demonstrate what is possible for faraway communities potentially by seeing what you're doing and what you learn. You can learn from them and they can learn from you. Everyone by going local, bringing things to human scale. I don't want to be shy about the fact that we face enormous challenge in this. We face these incredible political divides, especially here in the US, purposeful misinformation campaigns. But here, with the potential to return again and again and try different strategies, it's an opportunity to bridge, to face the division that so ails us. Certainly, we'll have in this work victories and defeats, but there is more opportunity, I would argue, for continuance, for returning. You can bring your practice of seeing no enemies, of seeing instead causes and conditions, seeing our interdependence, finding places of commonality, and responding to challenge with a compassion, sometimes a fierce compassion, always with wise speech. And I'll talk more about that purpose, that spiritual practice in a moment. So these opportunities to get local, build local connections, shared interests and dependencies. And that contributes to social capital, what Britt Ray in her book called Social Climate. That builds political power, longevity, and durability for multiple local issues. So we're arriving here at people. We all know the growing problem of isolation. With computers and certainly the pandemic, this inward turn, it's really hard on us. There's so much suffering. So by joining existing organizations, by making new connections, you offer something that we all need, building up local connections. It's against the stream. It won't be easy, but you can see that in and of itself as service. So what are some of the attributes of how we go about this? There's an interesting thing here in that there's a negative correlation between affluence and social capital. That is, the more money you have, the less connected you're likely to be. Think about, I have a gym in my basement. I don't. But if I did, right, I wouldn't need anybody, right? I have a movie theater in my basement. I need less people. I have a big, huge freezer. I need less people. I don't have to go to the grocery stores often. So we can become more independent. And that has its downside, significant downside. So we need to find the ways in which we need one another and sink into those. I leave it to you to discover what that can look like in your own life, but I suggest that it's vulnerable and intimate and so worth your time. What also builds social connectivity, that social climate, that social capital, is a container of commonality. Well, guess what? Common purpose of caring for local environmental issues and local environmental justice issues is a great way to build a relationship for that common purpose. Groups need to have porous boundaries. They need to be welcoming. You can contribute to the welcomingness of a community. You can be friendly and kind yourself and help newcomers feel really welcome. Ease of interaction. Can you listen deeply and really get to know people? Hold back your opinions for a bit. Learn even from those we deeply disagree with before we even share our first opinion. The feasibility of agreement on fundamental questions. Working through stressful conversations. Good communication, acceptance, understanding, generosity, offering relative safety. These are all things that our practice really helps us develop, and I suggest we are deeply needed in these kinds of spaces, that those attributes are deeply needed. So we can bring that emotional intelligence, that connection with the body that our Dharma practice brings to us. And I'm sure you've heard lots from other teachers in this online conference about the beautiful gifts that the Dharma offers to this space, the ability to work with challenge, to turn towards difficulty, to investigate our actual experience and our needs, to question these with compassion, to hold a view that is committed to appropriate response, but so flexible with regard to how that unfolds, and even without attachment to outcome. To say, I invest myself thus, come what may. Let that be my service and my practice. this practice teaches us to hold ourselves lightly in that way. And most of all, I especially want to point out here, managing reactivity. Ooh, with the storms that are on the way, that are already here, and more will come. Managing what we think we need and our own attachments and reactivity. Oh, the Dharma has so much to offer us individually and collectively. So to bring that to these spaces and get to know your neighbors, that's the deep keel. Not only the commitment to cause and to one another, but the ability to remain for the long haul with a loving and resilient heart. We're putting, this is, again, by bringing together our love for ecology, nature, environment, love of the Dharma, the love of justice, we get to put these to work here with this ground and have that necessary aspect of compassion, which is beyond just resonance with suffering, beyond empathy, but the movement, the active response. This is the fruition of our values and intentions, and it's good for us. It's generosity, expanding the self-sense. And whether you choose to bring your Buddhist practice with you as a capital B advertised, or just bring it along quietly with you, that's up to you. You'll sense which is better. But I know for myself, and I heard it put by a friend this way, when I am a Buddha, I am well received. When I'm a Buddhist, not so much. So better to be stealth and just bring the example, the practice of my practice, as opposed to naming it as such. So engaging in local community on concerns of ecological health and justice, rooting ourselves, whether implicitly or explicitly, in our Dharma practice and wisdom. I suggest that this is really juicy and necessary territory, such a great response to the I'm just one person, what can I do? As another friend said, don't be one person. I love that. So some cautions here. Local civil engagement can be deep, sustained, and transformative. It can also be fragmented and superficial. It's a matter of how we go about it. So research local community vulnerabilities and who's already working on them. Learn what they need. Get to know them as people. Assess your own potential and their potential to contribute to solutions, and see where you can be of use. So it's not about the kind of charity model of meeting needs, but rather helping to empower others, especially young people, marginalized people, to discover and nourish and develop their own power, their own voice. We take the long view, especially with our commitments, slow and deep. Fast and shallow commitment erodes trust. So move slowly. Give yourself a time to sense in what's possible and make the authentic connection, both with the issues and with the people. Operating on an extended time frame, emphasizing the development of relationships, building skills, and helping others build theirs. That's the opportunity to meet not just one challenge, but the multiple challenges that we know we're going to face together. So there's some resources here I can point to, Blueprints for Change. David Suzuki's foundation especially has community engagement toolkits, things like that. I'm sure, if you just research the name of your region, city, town, and environment issues or environmental justice or something like that, you might see things pop up in your search results. So again, I want to appreciate Buddhistdoor Global for inviting me to this. I hope that those ideas were helpful. And I also hope that we see some of you, you can, disagree with me or add to what I said or subtract from what I said when we meet in the panel. I hope to see you there. Okay, thank you again. And I welcome you to join One Earth Sangha as well. You can find us online. Okay,